guys, welcome to the Wolf and the Bear podcast. I'm going to try to work on some laundry, and I wanted to talk to y'all about a topic that came up a lot during my readings today. I had a full day of them and just got back home. Going to knock out some chores, but I'm kind of jazzed still, and I need to talk about something. So, I am starting a support group local to me in DFW at a place called the Miracles of Joy over in their Bedford location. And it's called The Dark Night of the Soul Anonymous. But really, at its core, what I'm trying to do is address this huge, huge thing I keep seeing, and also this thing that I am enduring at different times, which is this feeling when people talk about the dark night of the soul. You know, I know there's a lot of definitions for it, and I'm simply going to do an overview because I don't know how specific and what the rules are for some people. But to me, that just means that you are realizing you're going to have to go inward to enact a change that you want in your life. And change is really hard. At some point, I'm just going to kind of talk about these topics and post as I do, because I think it's really, really important that I get some of these thoughts out so that like every meeting I'm not just saying the same stuff, and also like as a resource for the group at some point. But this is the first video, and I'm going to cover the topic of what do you do when you realize something's super off, right? Like there's always a moment. Life is so busy, and at some point it usually takes a pretty significant breakdown or large event to trigger the feelings that I associate with the dark night of the soul, which is kind of a restlessness. Sometimes it's a boredom, like a bone deep boredom. Sometimes it's a deep pain and grief that you just can't seem to shake. That feeling of loss that you just cannot move forward from or through. It can be a paralytic relationship with the future where you're so scared of outcomes because maybe you've built a distrust with yourself or you've built a distrust with the world. And so as a result of that now, you can't really operate. All like issues, right? All things that start to say, something's got to slow down and we've got to address this. This is not this is not the feeling you're getting when you're really celebrating life and things are going well and you feel self-possessed. And we all know this feeling at some point. I think we've probably gone through it to varying degrees. The other thing that's less spoken about also that is a much harder to see disconnect that causes a dark night of the soul is whenever you allow shame to overcome you. Because if shame takes over the majority of your consciousness or consciousness, unconsciousness, then you stop celebrating things that you should celebrate. So then your viewpoint is now off and you can't figure out what's wrong because it's hard to diagnose that one. What that can look like is when you have a fine job and everything's great, but suddenly you start thinking about time. You start juxtapositioning where you think you should be. Anytime you're starting to play a comparative game with the future or the past, it should have been where I was back then, or I wish that anytime we're sort of not in the present time frame and we're feeling miserable, that can be what's up, is a shame trigger from youth. Anyways, so to center back to the point. So I want to talk about and cover the topic of energy in my definition of it. To me, definition is equitable to the word willpower. There's a book called Willpower. It's an amazing book to read. The first half of it's great. The second half is kind of just more data. But it talks about how they've proven very early with kids, they did a lot of studies there, and then obviously adults as well, that we have a finite amount of it in a day. The harder things are, obviously, the more willpower it takes to get through them. And so we can think about that as vibration as well. It's harder to exist in a vibration that's not a good fit. It's super easy and costs us almost nothing to exist in an environment that's a good fit. In fact, more often than not, we can be fueled by it. But the problem is, more often than not, we get ourselves into trouble. Either work's not a good fit, or home life is not a good fit, or friendships aren't a good fit. And worst case scenario, all three of them aren't a good fit. One's pretty tolerable. We can hate our job, but we can't hate our job and our home life. You know, or our bodies, or whatever it is. Like we can really loathe and still be pretty content and fulfilled and still having a way to fill our battery with even one peg down, right? But we can't have a ton of those So, and just so you know, every time you have something like that where you have to interface with it and it's not a good fit for you, you're fighting, you're existing in the world with one hand behind your back. So the faster you can remedy that is ideal. So for instance, if you're like, well, I wanted to stay 5 years, but I can stay 3, just remember that what you're saving yourself is that next 2 years where you have a chance to be in a better fit. You won't be so tired. You won't be so exhausted. There is a benefit to doing the hard thing to make your environmental match better. Because right now on the front end, it just looks like work, but you are getting something from it. And it's a chance at better alignment to your environment. So you're much more energized in life in general. And then the opportunity to become so energized that creativity and ambition return. Because when I say return, I want to say as your battery drops, it drops in phases. Energy drops in phases, and it goes. And it's like what happens when our body shuts down. We lose our exterior first, right? So the first thing we lose when we start losing energy is creative ideas, creative ambition, the desire and arrogance to say the world is a certain way and I'm going to change it for myself. That's the first thing that goes. The next thing that starts going is our physical health, our temperament, our ability to be kind. Our empathy starts to go down. Our health will start getting more sick. Things are energy costs. Then we can sort of right underneath there where we've recovered from being sick for 6 weeks straight, but now there's a numbness at place. And the numbness is a way to stop the cascade. But that only lasts so long because then we can either get angry or start acting out. And by the point it gets to that, we have less control over it. So again, like always, try to stop the cascade when you can. Cut the friends off that are sucking from you. Stop hyper fixating on your job if it's starting to drain you. Stop the cascade of whatever is costing you a ton of energy, and then give yourself some rest, and then start to analyze and address where the problem is and how to fix it, if it's fixable or if it needs to be removed, or if you need to do something with yourself or to make yourself more apt to exist in whatever is draining you. See what I'm saying? I'm not saying anybody is not in the wrong for it. I'm saying no matter what, we got to get right with something. Things need to be matched to who you are on a soul level. So that means you have to know who you are on a soul level, and primarily the bad and the ugly, because that's what gets lost. We know if we're smart. We know when we're pretty. We know when we're clever. We know what we're good at, right? Which is lovely. But we struggle to know what we are ashamed about, what we are angry about, what we still harbor resentment about, where we still feel like and when I say resentment, I almost mean like in a distance way, sometimes when we still feel owed, like that there's a debt out there that's unmet and that simmers. It doesn't really go anywhere unless we do something with it. We go collect it, or we acknowledge and cauterize and say, that's going to be what it is. I grieve what I didn't get, but I'm not going to be expecting this debt and being angry every time I don't get it, whatever that might be to people. The process of knowing oneself, and I'm going to give a couple of different ways to approach this, and then I'll kind of move on. Sometimes to say, who am I, it's like saying something into a void. Because if it was that easy, I mean, we wouldn't be lost in the first place. If it were that easy for you, we wouldn't be lost in the first place. Or maybe something has happened, a loss of love, a loss of a loved one, a loss of job, something earth-shattering essentially, to where now you are so hazy, you can't find yourself. There's a lot of reasons why we get lost. But the importance of being able to sit clinically with the truths of ourself, the process of that is the lifeblood of you always being able to be okay, no matter what you go through. But it's also the most challenging thing to do, because self-awareness and self-accountability are not really things that are preached to us in society. We're told who to blame, or if we're to blame, and then we're kind of told to just keep it all together and keep moving and keep being productive. So self-awareness and self-accountability are not an aid to most people in this society. So it's no reason, we shouldn't be ashamed of ourselves for not being good at it, but we should be trying to be better at it, because everything about our future happiness hinges on it. It's inescapable. If we cannot acknowledge what we are unhappy about, or what is driving the things that maintain our behavior that makes us unhappy over time, then that is our only tool, and that is the highest weapon. Because that means once we can name it, we can start to begin to address it. And I said start to begin to address it because it does feel like that. Like it's almost like start the process to begin the process to begin the process of knowing oneself. It's never easy. We avoid ourselves all the time. We lie to ourselves all the time. But truths look like this. Truths say, every relationship I've had so far, I really struggle with jealousy. What drives jealousy? What's driving my jealousy? Why is it that I worry so much about being enough? Because that's what jealousy is. Jealousy is the feeling of the fear that I won't be enough, so someone will take what's mine. Well, the antithesis of that should be, I believe in myself and the universe that if I maintain a truth to myself, if it's not a good fit for me, it will be gone anyway. Now that's the highest evolution you can have, because I promise none of us are watching our partner sit next to us and watching someone else's name pop up, not immediately feeling something. Like it's not, and the lowest version being a rage out because of it for no reason, and being completely self-confident in yourself and knowing that no matter who that might be, I will be chosen by the person meant for me. So those are vastly different. And sometimes it's just a gradient of how much food you've had and how much sleep you've had. That's how narrow that bridge can be sometimes, right? And so, but acknowledging, hey, if you can do something with yourself and you have a problem, let's say it's a relationship thing or an exchange. A relationship is the easiest because we've all been there. Let's pick that one. If you can pick the top 3 things about yourself that costs you, start there. Because that means that you already acknowledge whatever you're thinking about has done something negative to you. You don't have to take accountability of it in a super deep way, but it's acknowledging, it's not saying, I don't like this about another person. It's remembering times where you did something and you're like, dang, I messed up. That's going to cost me. Because what that means is that you might do it again and you'd rather not because you already know that didn't go well for me. So it's a diagnostic. It's a truth. And starting there is better than not starting. Now, if you look at yourself and you can't find that thing, if you can't find 3 things that you don't like about yourself when it comes to dating, that is not something that I would perceive as ideal. Because I don't know that I believe many of us are perfect. And I can fill 3 pages, not double spaced, of ways that I make mistakes in connection. And all I want is connection. But of all these things from my childhood or from current time or from my own bad behavior, whatever it could be, that has cost me. And so the more I know about it, the more I can mitigate it in the future. Once we sort of have a state, like a rap sheet of ourselves, right? You can start with the good, but we know the good. If we're going to be miserable, we might as well just do it. Just go be miserable. Make a list of stuff that you know in a perfect world, if you had all the time and energy, you would change about yourself, unrelated to anybody else. Because we can't change other people. Then we actually have a beginning space. Because of that list, there's going to be things that will be hard to change and things that are relatively decently easy. Not easy, but not so big, right? And at least we can start there. Because once we begin the process of addressing, like, here's an example. I'm a bad friend. I'm not the most present friend. I feel lonely a lot, but I don't feel motivated enough by that to go make effort to make new friends. That's just where I am right now. It's discordant, but I'm tired. I don't have the energy right now to do all the other things I want to do and fix this part of myself. So the cost is I'm just lonely sometimes. But then I have to go and look at that and say, are you lonely, or are you not spending the time that you have alone well? Because I do have periods of time where I can spend 7 days and not talk to another person. I've done it before. So there's something during that period of time that wasn't horrible about that. because I'm naturally introverted. I'm naturally hermit-like. So I have to ask myself, I'm experiencing loneliness, but am I lonely? Do I really want to change this, or do I need to change how I spend my time and that will make me happy? And on some level, that feels like splitting hairs, but only one thing's going to make us feel better. So we have to have the right diagnosis. Am I lonely, or am I not spending the time I have alone well? And that's for me to figure out. I don't have an answer right now, but I'm working on it. And it also, me knowing I need to work on that thought form and learn myself better, gives me something to do that lets me know I'm actively working to change my future for the better, that will help us feel peace and patience with ourselves, and not that frantic, what am I going to do if this doesn't change? Will I always be depressed? You'll start to feel like, okay, I'm a little bit depressed right now, but I'm working on it. I know that I'm addressing this. For instance, I know my house is a wreck. I'm trying to work on it slowly because I've been sick recently. I'm very depleted. I've had some emotional stuff drain me. So I'm kind of running on E. So I'm just doing what I can. I'm kind of piddling with chores. And at some point, when I get out of this low grade depression, so to speak, things will be back to normal. I have that faith in myself, so I don't rip myself apart right now. Okay, back to the knowing oneself. If you ask yourself and you're looking at your life and you're saying, dang, I should love everything about this, it's very important to isolate who said it should and sit there and think about it. Who said having a degree made you important? Was that your mom and dad? Was that the school you went to? Because that's a very socioeconomic thing. After a certain point in poverty, no one expects to go to, like, that trigger of shame is gone. And then there's a certain echelon above with money where it doesn't matter because you'll always be valued because you're in the right family, regardless of if you go to school or not. So you see how there are specific shame triggers that might just be societal, it might be socioeconomic, or worst case scenario that I see a lot, it's parental, or it's some outside influence from a young age. That's the hardest to uproot because it's attached to our value, and we don't typically have enough faith in ourselves or life experience to know that, hey, our opinion about it is greater than our collective memory and people around us. But if it turns out that you have zero desire or intention or capability to go get a degree, and every time you see yourself and think about yourself and you think about how you're not enough because you don't have it, you're the one that has to change because you're not willing to go out in the world and change it, but you're the one holding the judgment. So you have to do something with that. What you can't do is drink a lot, be promiscuous, all the things we do to avoid that. But that's a real thing. I felt that. I know a ton of people who have felt that. And it's really hard to say to oneself, I'm going to give up this thought form. I'm not going to pursue school. Even though everything about your behavior and your spending patterns and your whole life indicates also that you have no intention of doing this. You still don't do it and then hold yourself into this prison. You have two options. You go do it and you get rid of the guilt and shame that way, or you remove that thought form as a requirement for you to feel whole, which is a process and it takes time and it takes training with oneself. But at least you know the name of your demon. And then once you don't have that, life will be a little bit more peaceful because you have one less judgment to hold up against yourself. Now, we're riddled with things like that. Little weird judgments, little weird things that we don't like about ourselves that we judge but still do. So pick the big ones and allow yourself to just be flawed with the rest, right? We're trying to find the greatest, fastest path forward to happiness, not tear ourselves apart or go spend 8,000 years and $800 in therapy. We can't wait for everything to be okay to live our life. But we do owe it to ourselves to try to get to the point that we feel like it's okay if it's not currently. That's the path of the dark night of the soul more often than it isn't. It starts with acknowledging what you actually need, which is the hardest part. Acknowledging what you need requires you to know what you've built around you that you don't need. And you have to acknowledge the promiscuity that's making you a million times more shamed and guilt than you would normally need to have. Well, what is the promiscuity fixing? Because it's there for a reason. Because if you're judging yourself for it, You have a problem with it, but you're still doing it. So what's driving it? Well, typically promiscuity, if you have ADHD, it can be a soothe to dopamine. For other people, it can be a soothe to connection issues. To a lot of other people who don't like who they are, you get to put on a bunch of masks. Every time you go on a new date, you get to just show up as the idealized version of yourself for yourself. So sometimes that promiscuity can be very, very selfish because you're just picking a random person to act in front of you while you get to act out your stuff. Been there, done that. Like, there's no judgment. But once we start to acknowledge where these behaviors that we're judging ourselves for begin, we have the highest chance of removing them, or at least working on them, or reducing them, or taking an action that should be healthy that's now unhealthy and putting it back into the space of healthy. So you see how all of this comes down to spending time with oneself. Part of that process, if you like, I'm just going to give you homework if you want to participate in the thought of it. If you want to begin this process and you don't know where to, and you feel lost, remember a time where you feel like you had it all together and start there. What was true? What did you lose of yourself? Typically, when we think back on a better time, we feel we've lost part of ourselves. We used to do something we don't do anymore. Well, there's something that made us stop. Is it a person? Is it an evolution of relationship that's not working anymore? Is it indulgences that you let go too far? Like, where did it start? Hey, my cat is being so nice. The other way, start and just give yourself 5 to 10 bullet points. That's just a process of acknowledging. To do more is to rip through your soul, because you just don't need to do that in one sitting. Energy, be mindful of your energy. We're healing. We're not self-destroying. Sometimes that's a fine line, because sometimes when we don't like ourselves, we want to burn it all down and start from the ground up. Problem is, it doesn't work like that. We still got to pay bills next week, tomorrow, right? So we can't destroy ourselves and become catatonic almost. So just start saying, hey, I used to kind of like this about myself. Or if that's not how you feel and you just don't like where you're at, or something feels stale, whatever, you begin the process of saying, you start listing, begin a list of places where you feel your needs are not met. And normally that involves other people, or it's a work thing, whatever, right? But usually it's something that is very challenging to uproot and change, because if it were easy, it's done. And it has a name. It's job. It's a person, right? But we need to at least have that knee jerk, even if it feels blaming. You're going through you're trying to understand yourself, and you're recognizing that if you knew yourself, you wouldn't be here in the first place. So don't be arrogant with it. Don't assume the first time you do this exercise, it's going to all flow out of you like water, especially if you're stubborn. I'm super stubborn. Sometimes it takes me harder than I'd like to acknowledge behavior that I see in myself, whether it's from laziness, because I can also justify anything, because I'm a workaholic. So then if I start doing bad behavior, I can always just say, well, I'm just working a lot. No, you always work a lot. You like that. That's not an excuse. Not for me. I know that about myself, but I sure did try to use it. Anywho, spending time looking at the thing that feels lacking is the starting point. The next level to that says, how do I stop losing energy to it? And how do I start refueling? And we'll talk about that next time. But really what I wanted to get into was what energy is to me, how we lose it, how we get lost, what it means to be lost, and the beginning process. The first and only first step is to start digging through your dirty laundry. Start figuring out where it went wrong, what went wrong, that you can control. Because if you're letting somebody else walk on you, you don't start the sentence by saying, John Doe is walking all over me and I'm tired. Unfortunately, we've co-written this story. There's a part of him that's doing it too, and that's in his book. That's in his story. You're only writing your story. There's a part of me that is letting John Doe walk all over me. Why? It's a game of why. Well, because to fight with him is just too much. Why? Well, because he gets so volatile. Why? I don't know, he's just like that. And once it bottoms out to that, then you pivot and you start back with yourself. Say, well, why do I let that happen? What do I, or why, the next question would be, why do I allow it? If it terminates at some point with another person, or the next step is, what could I do to reduce its effect on me? Because sometimes it just is work. Sometimes the answer is, I have a horrible boss, but I need this money. So what do we need to do to reduce its effect on you? Then the next question would be, well, what's preventing me from being able to do so? Well, I'm a perfectionist. Well, work's so busy and I'm already in trouble. Like, name everything. This is not to judge. This is to acknowledge. Because later when you're driving and you're busy and life is busy and you're getting groceries and you have a thought form, you'll have weird aha moments from where you couldn't come up with an answer in the moment you're doing this work. Because you're just putting these thoughts through the washing machine. You're bringing them up on the forefront of the mind so that it can be managed again. Because sometimes we push this so far into our subconscious, it stops being in the rotation of our mind being able to clean it. It's just like big knots in our shoulders. Once they are too rooted, our body becomes numb to them. We stop feeling them. So what we have to go do is, as a practitioner, you have to go re-bruise the area to remind the body that that is there. That's sometimes what we have to do when we have to figure out, where is the wound? What is the wound? Because something is causing us to be depressed, unstable, grief-ridden, stagnant, bored, stuck in a marriage I don't want, stuck in a job I don't want, locomotion's nowhere to be found. All these things that we find ourselves in. We have to get back up at some point, or we're submitting our entire life to that process of essentially response and misery. So the first step is, I guess I'm going to go figure out what about me is preventing me from having what I want. That self-knowledge, I promise you, it sounds like you'll be crying, and maybe you will, but you will also feel the most in power you felt in a very long time. You will feel like you have control of yourself again just by naming your demons. You don't have to go fix them. You can literally name them and walk away for a month. Just naming them is the first step. I hope this helped. Take care.